The wind tore across the desolate plain, a raw blade slicing through worn fabric and thin flesh. Sarah hunched lower, her breath pluming in ragged gasps, each one stolen from the brutal cold. Days blurred behind her, a relentless march of fear and exhaustion. Every shadow a pursuer, every sound a threat. Home was a concept lost in the mists of betrayal and flight, a life stripped away, leaving only the desperate need to survive. The biting air carried the scent of ice and dust, promising a merciless night under an indifferent sky. Ahead, a low shape materialized through the swirling snow, a barn, small and weathered, but promising shelter. It wasn't hers. She knew that instantly. Out here, everything belonged to someone or nothing at all. But the alternative was freezing, and the gnawing fear of the unknown was a whisper compared to the screaming certainty of the storm. She crept closer, her boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. The barn stood silent, a dark hulk against the bruised twilight sky. No lights, no sounds save the wind's howl. Still, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. What if they were inside? What if they were worse than the cold? But the cold was a certainty, a slow, agonizing end. She reached the rough-hewn door, pushing against it with a trembling hand. It groaned open, revealing a deeper, palpable darkness within, smelling of dry hay, dust, and the faint, earthy scent of animals long gone or sleeping deeply. It was marginally warmer than the biting wind outside, a fragile sanctuary. She slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind her with immense effort, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. Darkness pressed in thick and absolute. She stood still, listening. Only the wind rattled the barn's timbers and whispered through cracks. No other human sound. She edged forward, hands outstretched, blindly navigating the space. Her fingers brushed against rough wood, then the yielding softness of old hay. She sank onto it, pulling more around her, burying herself in the dry comfort. The cold was still there, a deep ache in her bones, but the immediate sting of the wind was gone. Yet, tension held her rigid. This wasn't empty. There was an order here, a sense of use that went beyond storage. The air felt heavy with presence. She could smell it now, faint but distinct wood smoke clinging to fabric, leather, the subtle scent of a man. He was here, or he had been here recently. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She was an intruder, a trespasser on land that was fiercely guarded in this unforgiving territory. She pressed herself deeper into the hay, trying to become invisible, to regulate her frantic breathing. Every creak of the barn, every rustle of hay caused her to flinch. She was utterly vulnerable, relying on the silence and the darkness to conceal her. She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally battling with fear. She wouldn't sleep, not truly. She would remain on edge, listening, waiting for the sound of footsteps, the harsh challenge of a voice discovering her hiding place. But the cold was receding, just slightly, and for a fleeting moment, the desperate need for survival outweighed the terrifying risk she had taken. The barn held its breath with her, a silent witness to her fear. He found her at dawn. The light filtering through the cracks in the barn walls painted thin, dusty shafts across the interior, illuminating her huddled form in the hay. She awoke with a gasp, her body tensing, every muscle coiled for flight. He stood a few yards away, a tall, lean figure silhouetted against the slightly brighter doorway. His face was obscured by shadow, but his presence was palpable, a quiet, watchful energy. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, its dark metal catching a sliver of light. He said nothing, just observed her, his stillness more unnerving than any shout. Sarah scrambled backward into the hay, her heart leaping into her throat. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and thin. I just needed shelter." The storm, she trailed off, her explanation sounding weak and pathetic even to her own ears. She was a trespasser, and trespassers were rarely met with kindness. She expected anger, shouting, to be roughly thrown back out into the biting cold. He remained silent for a long moment, his gaze steady. She couldn't read his expression, which only heightened her anxiety. Was he assessing whether she was a threat? A thief? Just a desperate, foolish woman? "Get up," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly, devoid of obvious emotion. It wasn't harsh, but it held an undeniable authority. Hesitantly, she pushed herself up, dust and bits of hay clinging to her clothes and hair. She stood before him, small and trembling, her eyes fixed on his face, trying to find some hint of his intention. He was rugged, his face lined by weather and hardship, his eyes a color she couldn't discern in the dim light. He wore simple, worn clothes, a canvas coat, sturdy boots, a hat pulled low. He looked like the land itself, unforgiving, resilient, and keeping its secrets close. He lowered the rifle slightly, the small gesture a fraction of relief. "You can stay," he said, his voice still low. "For now. But you keep to yourself. No trouble." Sarah stared at him, relief flooding through her, so intense it made her knees weak. "Thank you," she breathed, the words barely audible. "Thank you." He gave a curt nod, not acknowledging her gratitude further. He turned and walked towards the back of the barn, where a small, rough partition seemed to indicate living quarters. He didn't offer food, didn't ask her name, didn't explain his sudden, cautious generosity. He simply accepted her presence as a temporary, perhaps necessary inconvenience. Over the next few days, a silent, tense routine established itself. He was mostly absent during the day, leaving the barn early and returning late. She stayed hidden, emerging only when she was certain he was gone to find a little water from a trough outside and to forage for anything edible he might have left behind, a crust of bread, a piece of dried meat left carelessly on a shelf. He never explicitly offered her food, but sometimes small portions would appear where she couldn't have missed them. She ate them quickly, guiltily, aware of the silent transaction. She learned to move quietly, to anticipate his return, slipping back into the hay before he was fully inside. They were two solitary creatures sharing a den out of necessity, acknowledging each other only through absence and the careful delineation of space. She observed him from a distance when he was inside mending equipment, tending to a small fire in a metal drum, eating his meager meals alone. He was efficient, self-contained, his movements economical. He never looked directly at her unless necessary, maintaining a distance that was both physical and emotional. She was a ghost in his barn, and he was a silent guardian whose motivations remained a mystery. The storm lingered for days, a shroud of white over the landscape, trapping them inside the barn. The wind howled incessantly, rattling the doors and whistling through every crack, a constant, mournful sound. The cold was a persistent ache, seeping into everything. Sarah huddled in the hay, pulling her thin coat tighter, shivering despite the layers. He kept a small fire going in the metal drum, a weak comfort against the pervasive cold. One evening, as the wind reached a crescendo, tearing at the barn like a hungry beast, she saw him look towards her. It wasn't a casual glance, but a deliberate assessment. The fire cast dancing shadows, flickering across his face, making his features clearer than she had seen them before. He looked weary, etched with hardship, but his eyes held a steady, unwavering quality. He simply nodded towards the fire. It was an invitation, plain and simple. Hesitantly, she rose and moved towards the drum, drawn by the promise of warmth. She sat down on a low crate a few feet away, still maintaining a respectful distance. The heat against her numb hands felt like a miracle. Neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, broken only by the roar of the wind and the crackle of the fire. It wasn't comfortable, not yet, but the shared space by the warmth felt less charged than before. She watched him tend the fire, adding small pieces of wood carefully. His hands were calloused, strong. She thought about the life he must lead out here, alone, battling the elements, carving out an existence from this harsh land. It mirrored her own struggle in a way, though her battle had been with people, with a past she couldn't escape. "Why are you out here?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper above the wind. It was the first question she had dared to ask him, the first time she had initiated contact beyond a fearful plea. He paused, looking into the flames. "Same reason as you, maybe," he said, his voice low, thoughtful. Nowhere else to go. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was more than she expected. It hinted at a shared understanding, a common ground of displacement and solitude. He looked at her then, directly, his gaze steady. "You running from something bad?" The directness of the question startled her. She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Her past was a painful, dangerous secret, but something in his quiet presence, his unlooked-for refuge, eased a fraction of her fear. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Something I couldn't fight." He nodded slowly, as if he understood. He didn't press for details. That was his way, observing, accepting without judgment, demanding nothing. In the firelight, his face seemed less forbidding, etched with a quiet resilience she recognized. Over the next few days, the shared space by the fire became a ritual. Still little dialogue, but a growing comfort in their parallel existence. She learned his name, eventually, Silas. He didn't ask hers, and she didn't offer it, clinging to that last shred of anonymity. She started small things around the barn, sweeping the dust, organizing some scattered tools. Simple acts born of gratitude and a need to contribute, however minimally. He noticed, she could tell, though he said nothing. He stopped leaving food scraps and started leaving small portions of his own meals out for her, openly. It was a subtle shift, a quiet acknowledgement of her presence, a silent offering of shared resources. The tentative trust, born of necessity, was slowly deepening, taking root in the harsh, unforgiving ground of their shared solitude. She felt a flicker of something other than fear, a fragile sense of belonging, anchored by the silent man who had offered her refuge. The morning the men arrived was heralded not by sound, but by a sudden, sharp shift in the air, a stillness that felt wrong. Sarah was sweeping near the barn doors when she froze, her instincts screaming danger. Silas was outside, checking traps near the small creek bed. She saw him tense, his head snapping up, scanning the horizon. 3 riders were approaching, fast, kicking up dust even in the damp ground left by the storm. Her blood ran cold. She knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that they were looking for her. Faces from her past, sent to reclaim or silence her. Silas was already moving, a silent, fluid motion towards the barn. He reached her just as the riders pulled up hard outside, their horses snorting, the men's faces grim and hard under wide-brimmed hats. They were rough men, the kind who did dirty work without question. "We're looking for a woman." One of them snarled, his eyes sweeping over the barn, missing nothing. "Saw tracks heading this way." Silas stepped forward, placing himself squarely in front of Sarah, blocking her from their view. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but Sarah felt the steel in him, the readiness. "Ain't seen no woman," Silas said, his voice even low, holding no hint of deception, just simple fact, as if discussing the weather. He didn't look at her, didn't betray her presence. The lead man dismounted, walking closer, his eyes narrowed, suspicious. He was older, scarred, radiating menace. "She's got dark hair, tall enough. Likely scared and alone." He peered past Silas, trying to see into the barn's shadowed interior. Sarah stood frozen behind Silas, her breath caught in her throat. She clutched the broom handle like a weapon, though she knew it was useless. Fear threatened to consume her, to make her cower or flee blindly. But then she looked at Silas's back, broad and steady, shielding her. A surge of something unexpected coursed through her. Not just fear, but a fierce, protective determination. This man had given her refuge, asked for nothing in return. She wouldn't be the cause of his undoing. The scarred man took another step. "Move aside, old man. We'll look inside." Silas didn't move. His hand dropped slowly to the rifle he now held, bringing it up slightly, the barrel pointing loosely towards the ground between him and the man. "You got no business here," he stated, his voice still quiet, but the steel was now unmistakable. "This is my place." The tension crackled in the air. The other two men dismounted, spreading out, their hands hovering near their sidearms. It was a standoff. Sarah watched, her heart pounding, ready to dart out, to draw the threat onto herself if it meant protecting Silas. But before she could move, Silas spoke again, his voice gaining a low, dangerous edge. "Riding onto a man's land, threatening him. That ain't wise. You turn around now, ride out the way you came. Forget you ever saw this barn." The scarred man hesitated, his eyes fixed on Silas's steady gaze and the rifle. He saw not just an old man, but a man rooted to his ground, dangerous in his stillness and resolve. After another tense moment, he spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he growled. "She can't run forever." He turned, mounted his horse, and with his men, rode off the way they came, disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. Sarah sagged against the barn wall, trembling, the broom clattering to the floor. Silas lowered his rifle, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a depth she hadn't seen before. "You all right?" he asked simply. She nodded, tears stinging her eyes, not from fear now, but from the overwhelming relief and a profound sense of gratitude. They were looking for me," she whispered. He knew. He had known the moment he saw them ride up, perhaps even before. He had simply stood his ground. He didn't say, "I told you so," or demand an explanation. He had offered protection, silent and unwavering. In that moment, something shifted irrevocably between them. The fragile trust solidified into something stronger, tempered by shared danger. She had come to him seeking refuge, a scared woman on the run. Now, standing beside him in the quiet barn, the echoes of the confrontation fading, she felt a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had faced the embodiment of her fear, not by running, but by being willing to stand her ground, ready to protect the man who had protected her. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was comfortable, shared. The storm was breaking outside, sunlight beginning to filter through the clouds. Silas walked over and picked up the broom she had dropped, handing it back to her. Their fingers brushed, a brief, almost accidental touch. It was a small gesture, insignificant to an outsider, but for them, it was a silent acknowledgement of a bond formed not by words or shared history, but by necessity, resilience, and the quiet courage found in the most unexpected places. Sarah looked at the broom in her hands, no longer a useless object, but a symbol of the life she was slowly, tentatively building here, grounded by the presence of this quiet, capable man. She had snuck into his barn seeking refuge, alone and afraid. Together, facing the storm outside and the threats from her past, they had found not just shelter, but strength, resilience, and the quiet promise of a future faced together, one day at a time. She wasn't alone anymore.